So even under the best of circumstances, it would be a tough room because usually I like to be able to make eye contact, and I'm looking over at the folks at the stairs there, and some of them are not yet looking up at me, but some just waved. And others all around the room are kind of wandering on. This is not the best of circumstances because I'm really under the weather, as you may be able to tell from my voice. This isn't my usual voice. And I've spent a good bit of my time here since my arrival Saturday morning trying to throw this by just staying in bed. But I didn't want to miss you. I didn't want to miss this time with you. So please try to help me out if you would. Okay, I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna give you a kind of general approach to your education, which is in part based upon the very fortunate life that I've had, and offers a couple of principles to you that are, I think, extremely consistent with what attracted me to C.S. Lewis when I found out about C.S. Lewis. This you may not realize, because it's too soon for you to realize. This is an extraordinary place. On Thursday night, I, in New York, went to a high school, not my high school, but a high school run by the same people that ran the high school that I graduated from 60 years ago. I spent 4 years at that high school, over 60 years ago, obviously, since it was my 60th graduation. That high school has not existed since 1972, before your parents were born, probably. But it hasn't existed since 1972. And I just want you to push your minds forward, if you would, because it's nearly 50 years since that high school closed. So push your minds forward 50 years from here, from being at C.S. Lewis here. And even though the school closed 50 years ago, every year, about 80% of us, it was an all-boys high school. We weren't smart enough to be co-ed. Okay, you have to understand, they're just smarter than we are. Okay, I'll get back to that in a moment. But in any case, it was an all-boys high school. And every year, since the school closed in 1972, about 80% of the living graduates, no matter where they are in the world, gather in the church. It was a Catholic school. We gather in the church of this other high school, and we go to Mass together, and then we walk across the street to the cafeteria of that high school, and we have dinner together, just to celebrate the school that hasn't existed since 1972. And we bring back all of our living teachers. Every year we put a fund together, and we bring back all of our living teachers to celebrate how special that place was. And I'm here in part to tell you something that you can't realize now. But at least today, I want you, in this time when we're constantly on our cell phones and we're constantly being stimulated, I want you to just slow your attention span down for a few minutes and just stop right now and take 30 seconds to think to yourselves about what is special about the group of people you're with in the school and the kind of education you're getting and the dedication of your teachers and the folks that have built the school to this place. So just take 30 seconds, not to talk to each other, but just to think about the specialness of C.S. Lewis, the way I and my schoolmates last Thursday were thinking about the specialness of a school that hasn't existed for nearly 50 years. So I want to start by telling you about two teachers at that school. Two teachers. Both of them great men. I want to emphasize that. Both of them great men. Although each played a very different role in the development of my view of the world and the view of the world that connects to C.S. Lewis. So the first was a priest. You could Google him. He became a famous political activist and enlightened, Slovakia is at this moment where you folks should be thinking about which direction you want it to go politically. Well, this priest, I was about your age when I met him for the first time, younger than you by a little bit. I think I was 12 or 13 when I had my first class with him. And this priest became, about 10 years after he was my teacher, he became a leader of the progressive movement in the United States, especially the peace movement. He was one of the people who had great personal cost. He went to jail for 3 years. But at great personal cost, he stepped forward and said no to the American involvement in Vietnam. And he shed his life to prevent that involvement's continuing. And gradually a huge national movement grew that caused us to get out of a horrible war with needless deaths. His name was Daniel Berrigan, B-E-R-R-I-G-A-N. Just Google him tonight. He lived until 4 or 5 years ago. He lived into his 90s. And he was my friend all along. But back in 1956, so that's a long time ago, that's 63 years ago, he wrote on the blackboard, this progressive man, this intelligent man, wrote on the blackboard in a classroom in which I was a student, the words extra, this is Latin for those, how many of you take Latin? Oh my God. I would draw everything I said about how good C.S. Lewis, no. We were not allowed to graduate from high school without 4 years of Latin, and we're not allowed to graduate from college without 8 years of Latin. That's what an education was, an education, my son. Not really. But he wrote the Latin words on the blackboard. I'll translate them for you. Extra ecclesia nulla salus. Extra ecclesia nulla salus. Outside the church, there's no salvation. Outside the church. Now just think of those words and think of how many different contexts in which they apply today. Think of the wars that have been fought over religion. Who were the good guys? Who were the bad guys? Each had a God. Each had a church. And in many cases, each thought outside their church there was no salvation. They had the only truth. The only truth. Extra ecclesia nulla salus. And I went up to him after class. And I said, prophetically for me, because it laid him, Peter told you about how he comes sometimes to me for romantic advice. That shows my children would say how needy he is. But the fact of the matter is that it really shows that I was lucky enough to marry the perfect person for me. And for the rest of her life, and now beyond her passing from this world, for 12 years now, it was 12 years ago that she died in an instant, suddenly. She's still present with me. Still present with me. But it turns out she was Jewish. She wasn't within the Catholic Church. Turns out that now, all these decades later, that we decided to raise our children Jewish. So all of my children and my grandchildren are all Jewish. And here in 1956, this man was writing, Extra ecclesia nulla salus. And I went up to him after class, and I said, Father Berrigan, does that mean my best friend, Jerry Epstein, Jewish, can't go to heaven? And he said to me, if you don't baptize him, he won't go to heaven. That shocked me. my moral and intellectual system. I couldn't understand. Jerry Epstein was a good person. He was my best friend. How could it be that I, with all of my weaknesses and insecurities and sins, would get to heaven and he wouldn't? Let alone when it got to Lisa, who is in a much higher moral position than anything I could ever dream of being. Extra ecclesia nihil. That was an intelligent man in a classroom in a grade school in 1956. It was before historical events that maybe you'll study, but I can tell you in my church were tectonic in their change. You know, tectonic beyond the level of the Velvet Revolution, tectonic beyond the biggest political change that you could imagine in Slovakia. That really changed the whole way the world looked. The arrival of a pope by the name of John the 23rd. You should look him up, because he told us from the papacy in Rome, other religions have wonderful people in them too, and they have things for which we can learn. And we should reach out. The word he used was ecumenical. We should be ecumenical. We should reach out. We should try to see the wonder of the meaning of life, the meaning of love, the transcendent existence of something beyond the obvious. All of the great questions, we should try to see them not just through the one window we were given by birth or location or whatever, but through the many windows of a mansion. And we should seek with curiosity, not giving up our own space, but literally putting ourselves in the other person's position and trying to understand what they believed as they understood it. And then, here's a greater trick still, trying to understand how they saw us. The great poet once said, if we could only see ourselves as others see us. If we could only see ourselves as others see us. Now, into that same classroom, just a little while later, came a man by the name of Charlie. Now, everybody at NYU Abu Dhabi knows Charlie. When I spoke here 4 or 5 years ago, I think I began with Charlie. So I'm introducing him now because he's a kind of counterpoint. He's the other great teacher, and I want you to think of the role of your teachers as they shape your views. But Charlie was a presence you noticed the moment you walked into the room. So Charlie looked at the age of 30 exactly like the guy that's on the Kentucky Fried Chicken box. Is that image familiar enough to you? He was a big man, weighed about 250 pounds, was about 6 foot tall, and he had prematurely white hair, and he had a very deep voice. And he had just gotten his PhD. He was not a priest like Danny Berrigan. And he showed up at our school, and for some reason they took 12 of us. And starting in our freshman year, we had Charlie every day from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. for a course they just called Charlie. And we had it for all 4 years. This is from 1955 to 1959. And we had no idea what this course was going to be. And you could notice it in the hall and everything. So we knew we had this extraordinary teacher. We didn't know he was a good teacher, bad teacher. We didn't know the content or anything else. Just Charlie, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., 12 of us. How they picked us, we didn't know. We walked into the first class. I'm going to give you a sense of his personality, okay? And I'm going to give you a big lesson from him that you can contrast with Danny Berrigan. So he walked into that first class and we didn't know what he was going to talk to us about. And there was a group of 12, all boys, so I'm going to use the 6 of you as my typical group here, but there's another row of 6 behind you. And he looked at us and he said, "Boys, on the first date," now that got our interest. We were all freshmen in high school, right? So on the first date, maybe this is going to be the course where we learn. On the first date, find out her IQ. Beauty fades, but the need for conversation never does. Think about that for a second. Right away, he began to build in us a healthy attitude towards women, towards ideas, and so forth. And then that sentence stays with me, more than 60 years later. Now, he had another great phrase, so you get a sense of him. And this one begins to touch C.S. Lewis. His motto was, play another octave of the piano. Play another octave of the piano. If there are notes that you haven't touched, reach out and touch them. If there's a food you haven't tasted, if there's a music you haven't heard, if there's a kind of person you've never met before. Okay, if you look around this assembly, and there are people here who are different from you, reach out to the most different, he would say. Play another octave of the piano. Find out their stories. Every person is a wonderful story. Get inside them. And then just, I told you about ecumenism, theological ecumenism that John the 23rd taught us. Think of it as a secular ecumenism. I want to know what's behind those spectacular eyes. Okay? I want to know the story that brings you. I want to get in your belief and the way you see the world, and then I want to know how you see me, and how that can make me a better person, both from what I learned from you about the way you see the world, and what I learned from you about how you see me. This is a secular version of ecumenism, and Charlie, that was the theme of his course, it turned out, for 4 years. We started with cave paintings and percussion music, and we worked up through the millennia, literally the millennia. We did 5,000 years doing simultaneously history, literature, art, and music. And we were all poor kids in Brooklyn. And this was before planes could fly from one continent to another. Planes going from the United States to Europe had to stop in a place called Gander, Newfoundland, in order to refuel. They didn't have enough gas to get there, let alone to the Gulf or halfway around the world. So, and by the way, we didn't have the money to get on a plane anyway. So I remember when we got to the old kingdom in Egypt, he had us, and this is the way we did everything, he had us read the history, of course, so we knew the history of the old kingdom. Then he had us read the Book of the Dead, and then he had us read Shakespeare's play, Antony and Cleopatra, and we saw the movie, which was just out with Liz Taylor in it, which was a big scandal at the time. And then he had on the wall slides of the art, and they were the pyramids of Giza. And I remember him saying to us, because we were all poor kids, and maybe we could get access to a car, but we couldn't get on a boat or a plane. We all know how to drive by the time we got to being seniors. And he looked at us one day with the pyramids of Giza on the wall, and he said, "Boys, you will never see these pyramids. You will never see these pyramids." He knew where his students were. Because you can't drive to them, boys. But, notice the way he opened the world to us. There are pyramids south of here, built by great civilizations, the Incas, the Mayas, that you haven't studied. Because in those days in American schools, you didn't study those civilizations. You just haven't heard of these pyramids, boys, because the damn British didn't rob these pyramids for their museums. So he was already talking about who owns art. Who owns the Elgin marbles from the Acropolis? The British Museum or the nation of Greece? So there he was, way at a time, thinking to us, plan. Now put that idea together with John the 23rd and seeing the world through other people's eyes, and then put it together with ecumenism
but now not a theological ecumenism, but a secular ecumenism. And then look around this room and think of this school, and what attracted me to this school when I first heard about it, when I started coming over here, and when these two wonderful women that work with me, Emily and Laura, stand up just for a second. You should thank them because they're the ones that provide the scholarship. But what attracts us to you is the fact that you've got this secular ecumenical gene. And I'll tell you something, that's the hope of the world. Because you know what? Danny Berrigan could say that to me in 1956, but 60 years later, I could be in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican with the leaders of 25 other faith traditions from around the world, all the major faith traditions in the world, and we could be having an ecumenical conversation right there under the Last Judgment and the creation, in the heart of the papacy, appreciating each other's religions. But you know what's happened? And Slovakia is an example of this, but my country, I would say in a way, is an even more disturbing example of it. Because at least you can make an argument that this country has a trend line going in the right direction. You can't make that right now about the United States of America. What's extraordinary is that in 1956, our political leaders in the United States worked together to get good policies done. I could name policies that we adopted in the United States in the 1960s, like the Civil Rights Act, the women's movement, and so forth. But those required the parties to work together. But you know what? Now, today, our political views in the United States, I'm not going to comment on this country, you know this better than I here. But in the United States, if you watch the papers, our political views are as dogmatic as were the beliefs that Danny Berrigan told me were necessary to get into heaven. And they don't come from reason, they come from revelation. They just somehow are believed. And then we watch news shows that just reinforce that. We go down into a cave and we watch stuff that has a confirmation bias about it. And we don't have genuine political dialogue. Now I'm going to close by just giving you an example of what I believe is the dialogic process that you should in this school make a reality, and then gradually in concentric circles working out, make more and more a reality in your town, in your country, and hopefully in the world. Because we've all got to work on this. If we don't work on it, it's going to be a disaster. Because we're just going to be in different tribes. They won't be religious tribes, they'll be political tribes, and we'll get farther and farther apart. 40% of Republicans in the United States of America today feel the Democratic Party, we have two major parties, feel the Democratic Party is a threat to the country. And 40% of the Democrats think the Republican Party is a threat to the country. In 1956, when Daniel Berrigan said extra ecclesia nulla salus, 3%, 3% of Americans said that they would object if somebody in their family married somebody from the other political party. Today, in the United States of America, that number is 40%. 40%. More than race, more than ethnicity, more than religion. Can you imagine that? To marry somebody from the other political party. That's what our politics has come to. And we need a secular ecumenism. Now I'm going to close just very quickly by telling you about the high school activity that Charlie told me to get into that changed my way of looking at the world and set me up for a world of secular ecumenism. It was high school debate. High school debate. Now, I don't know how you do debate here. You do debate, I know. I don't know how you do debate, but I just want you to think I'm going to give you 4 characteristics of high school debate the way we did it. Okay, first, it was the same topic for the whole year. The same topic for the whole year. So I'll give you, resolve that there should be universal service for all citizens. So all year long, we debated that topic, and you'd have to read and learn more about it. So if you were a champion in October, and you didn't advance your thinking, you didn't get deeper into the subject, by November, you were toast. Because everybody else was studying and learning and developing new arguments and expanding the meaning, right? So number one, same topic for the whole year. Number two, in each debate, there was a team of two. Stand up. Stand up. I'm not going to embarrass you, don't worry. Stand up here. You guys help me out. Stand up here. You're over here. So, turn around, face that. Look at that. Show me your better side. Yeah. Look, just turn around, face that. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything to you. Okay, so this is the first affirmative. The first affirmative would lay out the case why there should be universal military service for all citizens. The first negative would answer those arguments. Then the second affirmative would have to get up, and you couldn't repeat what your partner had said. You had to respond to what this guy had said. Right? So you had to develop the argument in the debate. Each of this in 8-minute speeches. Then the second negative would get up. So already the argument's gone through 2 iterations. Now the first negative gets up and gives a rebuttal, pushes the negative case stronger. Now the first affirmative gets up and pushes the affirmative side even more. Deeper, 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 deeper. Now this guy gets up, he pushes the negative, and then bang, he ends up with the second affirmative. Sit down, gentlemen. Very well done. Let's give him an applause. That was very good debate. So my point is, second point about competitive debate the way we did it, in every debate, the argument had to get deeper. If you did what politicians do in a debate, and the second person for the affirmative just repeated the same slogans, because you had a judge following it, it was called extending the argument. Now you want to know something else? This third characteristic, this is so cool, what I'm about to say. Think of this in terms of my argument to you that we need to create real dialogue, secular ecumenical dialogue, right? You didn't know which side you were going to be on until the coin was flipped just before the debate. So you had to know the arguments on both sides of the question. You couldn't just become an affirmative specialist or a negative specialist. You really had to study and think and operate in the gray area. And number 4, and we had more time, I would say, think of what you think the most important characteristic of a champion debater is. And of course, intelligence, and the ability to say a sentence after another sentence. But what distinguished very good debaters from champion debaters, and I was the national champion in the United States when I was a senior in high school, and then I spent 15 years of my life working with high school students, all young women, and they, in those 15 years, were national champions 5 times. So I know what a champion debater is. Notice I picked coaching women instead of men because, as I told you, they're just smarter than we are. And you know, what's your name? Steve? I can tell you know that. See, look where you sit. These guys over here, they haven't gotten it yet. All right, but in any case, do you know what the greatest skill of a champion debater is? Listening. Listening. Because you've got to listen to your opponent's argument and understand it if you're going to be able to answer it in an extensive way. Now, whether you do competitive debate here at school or not, whether it's in that form or not, I want you to think about that as a model of what genuine political dialogue is. By the way, it's also a pretty good model for being in love. Because if you learn to listen to the person that's your partner and let him or her show you the way you're seen by the rest of the world, that's the great exponential value of love. But anyways, I see those possibilities here. And I want all of you to think out how you can make C.S. Lewis live closer to what I'm calling secular ecumenical values. Because it's the reason that this school was created by that wonderful man. And let's give him a round of applause. It's the reason why we flew for 9 hours to get here. So we have time for, I want to have a question or two. Who wants to ask a question?
There is a mic.
Okay? No, we'll toss you the mic. Come on now, somebody step up to the plate. I want you to ask me a question that comes out of this. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask Martin to ask the question. And that would not be fair. You don't want to embarrass him again. So come on, somebody.
It's hard, yes, oh, no.
Tell me your name.
Oh yeah, Sam.
And who are you, Sam?
Who am I? Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
That's a good answer. But where are you in life?
Finishing, high school. I guess confused.
Have you decided the next step yet?
No, not yet, to be honest.
Okay.
So, but my question, so you said 40% of Americans.
Put the microphone like this.
40% of Americans wouldn't be okay with a member of their family marrying somebody from the other political side. And I was wondering, what is, in your opinion, the best way to deal with that when somebody is in love with somebody who has different political values? What's the best way to communicate that or, resolve something like that?
Well, that's a great question, Sam. And of course, you made an assumption for the purposes of this conversation, and that is, so here we have people from the two political parties that have fallen in love. So that's a given. That's a given. So it's like the Romeo and Juliet story, right? I mean, and how do we explain it, back at home? And how do we get the families to get beyond that? And the short answer is that in the immediate future, it's not always going to be possible. But you should never forget that the most important thing that's going to happen in your life is the choice of a life partner. And if you're lucky enough, Sam, to find the right life partner, the first thing you ought to do is make sure the two of you understand the pressures that are going to come upon you because of this feeling that's out of society. Second thing is, it's remarkable how people are able to have a view in the abstract, but in the concrete they can make an exception to it. So don't try to do too much. Don't try to get the people in the two families to a point. Let's assume that they're among that 40% in both cases, otherwise you wouldn't have an issue. So don't try to get them to say, it'd be okay for you to marry any person from the other party, just this person. In their minds, they may come to believe that he or she is really one of us, just doesn't want to say it. They're all people. Good. So don't try to prove too much. Just try to get them to see the wonder of the person that you see, or at least a small part of it. And then there's still going to be some cases. I had a wonderful protege of mine, a couple in Abu Dhabi, and she was an Egyptian Copt who converted to Islam, and he was a Muslim, and her family would not attend the wedding. And I worked with them through that, and then, and I said to them, when the first grandchild is born, there's another shot. And now there are 3 grandchildren and the families are together. So sometimes time. But that's talking the specific case, Sam. The larger case is how do we change society? And the way we have to change this political division in society is by making it more and more possible. Now, notice what I say here. My debaters would come back to me after their debate and they would say, we made that argument. We did what we're supposed to do to win the debate. Here, I'll even show you where it was on my flow chart and the cards I wrote to make the point. And I would say, no. It's not your obligation. It's not your obligation to say the argument. It's your obligation to cause the argument to be heard. Don't put the burden of hearing on the listener. Now, we should all try to be good listeners, but the speaker should understand that it's his or her obligation to cause the message to be heard. And that means that those of us in society, and I don't know enough about Slovakian society to map this here, but in my country, for example, the wealthy, the white, the certain nationalities and upbringing have been very privileged over the 2 or 3 centuries that our country has existed to have voice. They spoke and it got heard. There were other parts of our body politic that never really had a chance to be heard. Start with the Native Americans. Start with African Americans. Start now with immigrants. Start with women. Okay? So those of us like me, who have had the privilege of voice, should learn to be a little quiet and do a little listening for a while and let others speak, so that a trust space can develop for conversation. And don't always go into a defensive mode. Just try as best you can to understand it, and gradually trust builds up. But that's what we've got to do in society generally. And that's where I see C.S. Lewis as part of the solution. Thank you for the question, Sam. I think I'm up against what I was told was the clock. But one more question in the back. I do have time for one more. Dusan? Tell us who you are.
I'm Abbas.
Abbas.
Yes.
And what are you in life?
Who am I in my life?
Yeah, are you a student here, or are you delivering a pizza? What?
Well, as far as I know, I'm a student.
In what year?
Sophomore.
Okay. You know what sophomore means in Greek, right? No? You don't? Sophomore? So you don't take Greek either? We had to take 3 years of Greek to get out of high school, and have 2 more years of Greek to get out. I don't know what's happened. What do you study? Do you actually? No. So, sophomore means wise fool. Okay, so the sophomores, if you think of it, they're old enough to think they know a lot, but they don't really yet. But I know you know a lot, so ask your question. No, you. See, I'm sorry, I got you so nervous you turned it off. I apologize. Oh, that's perfect. Just put it to you like this. Yeah.
My question is that in the school that you went, the priest or the teachers who were there, I want to ask that they make you feel they wanted for you to think one specific way, or they helped you think the way you think?
I think, of course, it depended on the individual teacher, and there was a faculty of 60 or so, and they would be different. But the school as a whole shaped me before John the 23rd and the Second Vatican Council, which started in 1959, said I was out of high school then, going to college. That high school prepared me to think this way. Well, thank you very, very much for listening to me. I appreciate it very, very much. Bye.
Thank you, John, very much. By the way, the project of our scholarships, we named walls instead of, bridges instead of walls. But it looks like there are many people who are professionals in selling fear. They are building walls. You have a walls builder in the United States. We have some guys who are building walls as well. So maybe debates, as John described, may be the good cure for building bridges. So thank you very much, John, for coming here.